Hey everyone, welcome to this Azure Back to School initiative, where in the next 45 something minutes, I guess, I will introduce you to Azure DevOps auditing stream. Now, I'm more than excited to bring here with me James Cook, the one and only James Cooks, ladies and gentlemen. Hey James, how's it going?
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter, for asking. Literally, I'm so excited to show everybody what we have been working on the last couple months. Before we move on, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to Dwayne Natwick for, again, bringing the Azure back to school this year, as well as doing it last year. I'm very grateful myself to be presenting with you. I believe this is your second session this year. I think you've done one just a few days before this one.
Yeah, that's actually right. I did a session on Azure 100% high availability, how to like bring in different Azure architectural designs and making your workloads running more efficient. And it's actually my third session, I would say, because I did one last year as well. So for me, it's like the Azure back to school is back something. But if you're interested, it's still somewhere on the YouTube channel. So if you're like, oh, this sounds like a cool session, obviously more than happy to guide you in that direction, according to all other Azure back to school sessions that we already had and still coming up in the next coming days. Now, it's obviously not about all the sessions because that would be a little bit hard to go through, but let's focus a little bit on our session here today. So what we're going to cover seems like pretty easy. It's only 4 different topics, but we promised you around 45 minutes. So in short, we're going to spend a little bit of time on Azure DevOps auditing. We're not going to explain what Azure DevOps is. We assume that you somehow know it, but super interesting new feature currently in public preview is auditing. Now, besides auditing, there is obviously a pretty big difference between the existing traditional audit logging and the new public preview feature that's called auditing streaming. After that, we're going to briefly touch on some permissions because we're talking about some confidential information that you might capture from your organization. And last, and that's probably going to be the biggest part of the session, where we're going to drill down in the different streaming targets. Like once we have the auditing information, where are we going to stream it to? And obviously a lot more slides than, a couple of slides. And from there on, moving on to a lot more demos, right, James?
Yeah,
man, this was confusing.
Yeah, definitely more demos.
We love doing demos. We don't like slides, but totally fine. Let's maybe cover some logistics, who we are. Again, everybody knows James, but nobody knows Peter. So this is me. I am Peter, currently connecting from Belgium. And if you try to find me on social media, it's PDTIT on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Snapchat. I'm getting too old for that. From a professional side, I'm working as an Azure technical trainer within Microsoft. Only started my 3rd year this week. So celebrating little anniversary, I guess. And it's one of the most clear job roles ever in Microsoft history. So what I'm doing as a day-to-day job is providing Azure technical training to customers and partners every single week. In a little bit of free time that I have, I'm a technical writer or a supporter for other technical writers by doing technical reviewing, coaching, helping them on how to write books, and so much in love with community. I was an MVP before for 6 years, but you have to give that away when you go back to Microsoft, but it doesn't stop me from doing community work. That's me.
And obviously, my name is James Cook, and thank you for Peter for highlighting my people know me well. I'm very active on Twitter. Very active on Twitter. I spend a lot of my time on Twitter. I'm at the moment transitioning into a DevOps engineer role. So once you watch this, next day I will be starting my day 1 as a DevOps engineer. I am a Microsoft certified trainer as well and a DevOps engineer certified expert. This year I have become a active Azure and DevOps blogger on jamescook.dev, and I am very active in content creation and community collaboration on Microsoft products with other people in the community.
Sounds cool enough, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. I would say from here, let's jump in, making it a bit more technical. So marketing stuff is done. You know, we're going to talk about Azure DevOps, but one specific feature, you know who we are. So let's dive in and talk what Azure DevOps auditing is about and what you can expect from it. In short, Azure DevOps auditing, or ADO in short, as we call it, it's what you can expect from the title. It's an auditing service. Now, auditing means that it's almost going to capture everything that's going on in your Azure DevOps organization. If you want to find out like what pipelines are running, if you want to find out when pipelines are getting kicked off, if you're more interested in your DevOps environment from a project management using Azure DevOps boards, you can get a view on who's opening what are the incidents coming in, what are the bugs getting reported, those kind of scenarios. And maybe on the artifact side, figuring out who's using what are the NuGet packages somebody's using, or anything like that. Now, besides a technical reason, I would say from probably the DevOps team, where they want to get insights on everything that's happening, you might also have some compliance or governance regulation, where you literally need to know who's doing what in my DevOps environment, and maybe for some legal proof every now and then, not always having a positive connotation, although it could actually be referring back to something positive as well. And then last, you could also use auditing as a starting point for taking further actions, like literally kicking off auditing events. If you're wondering like what gets audited, I gave you a couple of examples, but it's not everything. I'll show you some details in an upcoming demo as well. But in short, it's actually, I would say, pretty complete. I don't know what you think about it, James, but I think for now, it's giving us like almost everything we are looking for. And again, not having that technical DevOps engineer or maybe like a Scrum Master or someone watching over the details, but really think of the auditing as like a compliance auditing instrument. So it's going to show you obviously overall high level information, the actor, like who's the DevOps engineer triggering a specific action in DevOps, the IP address from where that action was getting triggered, obviously the timestamp allowing you to go back in time, figuring out like what happened 3 months ago, somebody messed up my Azure deployments, and we want to figure out who actually did something wrong. That could be a use case. The target location, like where in Azure DevOps, is that event happening? Is it a pipeline? Is it boards? Is it artifacts? And a little bit more in depth around categories, like literally giving you a nice overview of a lot of details, I would say. So that's about it on the first part. You have a pretty good idea what the audit logging is about. So let me jump to my first demo, where I'm briefly going to show you how to enable the feature, because the auditing is in preview for now. How to enable it. If you don't see it in your environment, you at least know where you can find it. And from there, showing you a little bit of what the current auditing looks like. So let me quickly show you how to enable auditing in the preview mode, I would say, out of your Azure DevOps environment. So when you're logged onto your Azure DevOps environment, you might need to check if you actually have the preview features enabled. You can do that from this little preview option here on the right upper menu. You go into preview features, and from there you can basically enable or disable specific preview capabilities we provide for your DevOps environment. And even more granular, could be interesting to maybe test something out before the rest of your organization DevOps team is using it, where there might be a differentiator between individual preview features that you're going to use as an individual or that will become available for your organization. Now, important, auditing is active on organizational level, so you cannot split up per project, which means once you have that preview enabled and you switch back here to auditing, it's going to show you this streams option as well. Again, if you don't see it, it might be because you're lacking permissions to enable that preview feature, but more on the streams later on. Now, the auditing logging has been introduced in DevOps for a long time, probably since day one, even in the predecessor of Azure DevOps, like a Team Foundation server or Visual Studio, team services in between. So what you can do here with auditing is reading out what's happening. Now, by design, it's picking up like the last day, because you could assume that anyone is like regularly checking, although we told you that's typically not always the case. But you have a couple of modification options here. So you can choose the timestamp, and let me like go back, let's say 2 months back in time, where it's going to show a little bit more on what's happening. So I can see that, oh, I accessed the audit log like 5 times just to go through this demo literally. And it's also showing like Azure DevOps backend capabilities. In this case, there's an extension getting installed if you use third-party marketplace components. And they're typically like self-updating. If there's like a new version getting published to the marketplace, it's automatically updating on the Azure DevOps site as well. But it's also going to show you, for example, like pipelines. Let's see if we have any other piece of information. And I'm going to try to make it a bit smaller and then making it a little bit bigger again. There we go. So you can see that I introduced a NuGet security analysis package, adding something else, creating a new service account, which might be seen as an important piece of information in your auditing. And let me scroll down, where you could also, for example, up here, identify when a new release got created, which technically means there is a new pipeline kicking off. And you could also see the user who's going to execute it. So that's in short what audit logging gives you. Later on, we're going to obviously expand it a little bit, talking about streaming. One last part I want to show you all the way up again is exporting to a CSV file or a JSON file. Since a lot of Azure is based on JSON, I would say let's go for JSON, but on the other side, you can obviously choose. And quickly showing you what we have. So it looks a bit weird here, but again, it's JSON. So you're probably, hopefully I would say, familiar with JSON. It's going to show you the exact same output. Quite important. It's not going to show you everything. It's literally based on the filtering you defined on screen in the audit logging itself. That's basically what I wanted to show you for now. Audit logging, how to enable it, how to expose that stream preview feature, and using some of the core capabilities of logging. So there you go. That's it. Azure DevOps auditing. Nothing harder than that. I would say thank you. See you next year, but we're not done yet. We promised you 45 minutes. We're only a couple of minutes in. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about the difference between logging and streaming.
Yeah, so with logging and streaming, we have 2 differentiations. So with login, we have access, filter, and store offline. We have nobody really watching over the logs until they have to. That's purely because no one is actively sitting there at their desk and watching these come in and refreshing F5 every time you're looking at these logs. And it's on by default. You cannot switch it off. It's there. Anyone can go to it and see it. And I think it is about 30 days the logs are kept here. They're not kept any longer. You cannot go back any further. So the difference with streams is that you can move auditing information out of Azure DevOps and it can go into another product or service. You can take actions based on the auditing events, compliance feeds to third-party environments. So you can do that as well. And optional and currently in public preview. So this is not it's not a stable release. It's not generally about, it is just public preview. So what we're showing you, it might not be the finished product. It is active. You can play around with it, but expect that changes are going to happen. So
most probably, I would say.
Yeah, most probably. If it's still in public preview, I think it's been in public preview now for over a year now. So I expect there's going to be a big change coming at some stage here. But at the moment, it's pretty good product already. So now high level share of bits on permissions. Over to you, Peter.
So, well, given again the fact that it's all based on auditing, it typically means that it's containing some confidential information, because maybe you have some Azure DevOps engineers who have the authority or the permission to run a pipeline, but maybe not seeing anything else that's going on in your DevOps environment, or maybe not seeing everything on organizational level, but only on a specific project. So that's where I think we need to spend a little bit of time on the permissions as well. Now, by design, for now, there's like two main groups that we want to highlight. The first one is a default group called project collection admins, and those one by design get full access to the auditing information. I think makes sense. They're project managers, project admins, and they basically got access to all the projects already. So giving them access to the auditing log probably makes sense, at least to me. The second group is where you have a little bit more control, and that's what we call the project collection valid users, pretty complex, but that would allow you to give them viewing access to the auditing page without exposing all the details, as well as exporting to some offline logging, like think of a CSV file, maybe an Excel file. And from there, maybe you can move it into some custom reporting tool or some other security auditing compliance tool that you're using. And basically what I showed you in the previous demo already.
Okay, I think it's now time, Peter, that we jump into the specifics and streams. I think we should first look at is what targets are there.
Sound good. So as you can see here, there's like three different options where you got Event Grid, one of the scenarios we'll talk about. Azure Monitor Logs would be a second one, and Splunk, because we briefly touched on a third-party scenario, is also available. Again, it's previewed, so those are the three options we have for now, where Event Grid is one of the first options that I'll talk about. So Event Grid, if you don't know, it's nothing specific to Azure DevOps. It's an overall Azure event handling service. I like to call it the watching over agent. Sometimes it's described as an orchestrator. Sometimes it's described as a police officer guiding like the traffic in like the middle of London, most probably somewhere where there's a lot of traffic jam and you actually need a police force to help you out. So that's what Event Grid is about. Now, in short, it allows you to interact with mainly Azure services on the left-hand side. That's what we call event sources. You could have an event in Azure Blob Storage. When somebody's creating a new file in Azure Blob Storage, that could trigger an event. If you create or change a resource group, that could be seen as an event. If you have something happening in Azure DevOps and you're going to capture that from an auditing perspective, that could now also be seen as an event source. So that's where Azure DevOps auditing is hooking into an already existing powerful, super rich, capable Azure Event Grid. The nice thing is that once you have your event source, Event Grid is that orchestration in the middle that allows you to fire off, trigger specific events to do something. So in case of Azure DevOps auditing, something happens. James is running a pipeline. He's not allowed to run a pipeline, but somehow he has the permissions to do that, but maybe it's the bad timing where out of that audit logging, nobody's really going to see it, right? Because what James mentioned is, well, it's logging. It's a little bit, I would say, offline, a little bit reactive, like, oh, something happened. We need to investigate. We're now, thanks to that integration with auditing streaming and pushing it into Event Grid, you can now build actually really powerful workflows. When James is running a pipeline, when James is updating some item in Azure boards, or even when James is logging onto Azure DevOps, like the highest level of getting into the auditing level, that's going to fire off something else, which by itself could actually still be a pipeline, but that's like going around the world to actually run a new pipeline. So why not running an Azure function to maybe run some PowerShell script to remove everything that James' pipeline was actually deploying? Because again, James was not allowed to do that, right? So that's like some of the scenarios you can look at. So a couple of other examples here, running overall serverless application. Event Grid is just another Azure service where you don't have to manage the backend. There's no virtual machines to manage, to patch, no high availability you need to worry about. It's all coming out of the box. It's end-to-end automation from an event source, in our case, the Azure DevOps auditing, and allowing you to automate pretty much anything else. nicely integrating with a lot of other Azure services. And if you want, you could also fire off like a pretty generic REST API call to anything else. Interacting with Teams channels, why not? Interacting with Slack because it doesn't limit itself to Microsoft tooling, and so many other options. And the other benefit I would say is that for each and every event that you're going to trigger out of Event Grid, apart from Azure DevOps auditing, obviously, it would be one super small cost per event. So it's like 0.000 in your local currency. And the first 100,000 events are always available for free per month. So you would need to do a lot of things wrong in Azure DevOps, firing off a lot of auditing streams before you actually need to pay something in Event Grid. But with that, I think we talked enough about Event Grid and the auditing integration. So let's jump to another demo here and showing you what Event Grid integration looks like, how to define it, and from there showing you the output in the Event Grid monitoring pane as well. So from it in the organization settings, auditing, you already know, we go into a stream scenario where you can create a new stream. Again, for now in public preview, it's quite limited on how many streams you could build up, but I can imagine in the final release, it's going to allow you to come up with a lot more streaming functionalities, or at least creating multiple streaming pipes. I'm using the Event Grid for now, where it's nothing too hard from the Azure DevOps side. I would say it's actually like the only two settings you need to provide: creating an Event Grid topic endpoint URL and providing the access key, which allows you to obviously communicate between Azure DevOps auditing and the actual Event Grid. To do that, you switch back to your Azure environment and you're going to create a new resource called Event Grid Topics. Just like any Azure service, you would just provide some base information around the name of the service, the location of the service, the resource group, where a little bit further out, you can specify the resource group like any other base Azure service. Once you create it, and again, just want to speed up the demo a little bit, it's going to show you this Event Grid service component. Where you're going to find your topic endpoint URL up here. So this reflects the topic endpoint field 1 that you need to complete in Azure DevOps. And you also need an access key. The access key is again like some kind of service password, service credential. It's literally a text string, so I'm not really going to show you. And from there, you copy paste it into Azure DevOps and allowing you to interact Azure DevOps auditing with Event Grid. Now, Event Grid as the service, again, is not really doing anything because you need to define that event subscription. Like, this means it can recognize information coming in from Azure DevOps. So you would add a new event subscription. And the event subscription is allowing you to point to some third-party service that's going to receive the events and preferably, or if you want, taking an action. So you would provide a event subscription detail. This could be the PDT Azure DevOps Audit subscription, where you can filter on specific event types. Obviously, if you only want to filter on information around pipeline runs, but nothing around security features, or maybe the other way around, you only want to filter security features, you could obviously do that. Where it becomes a bit more interesting, I would say, is the endpoint type. What is the endpoint type? It's the service intelligence from Event Grid that's going to recognize the incoming audit stream and sending it along to another service. Now, in my example, I'm going to use storage queues because it's just showing you enough about the core capabilities, but you could use some really interesting use cases. If you have experience with Azure Functions, where an Azure function can allow you to interact with API calls within Azure or anything outside of Azure, or running some system PowerShell scripts, you could trigger the function. Integrating with a webhook could be another interesting one. If you think about interaction with Teams notifications, maybe using Slack or something similar like any notification communication tool, typically they allow you to interact with that third-party platform using a webhook. Integrating with on-prem monitoring scenarios out of the hybrid connections where you're going to build up an integration between your Azure Event Grid, like again that orchestrator, and sending information to an on-prem running system center scenario would be a use case. Or integrating with Service Bus, another queuing messaging system, and from there again allowing you to move to some third-party tool typically running outside of Azure. But I'm going to use storage queues. What you need for storage queues, I'm not really having that in the demo deployment, I would say. You would create an Azure storage account. Within, you're going to create a storage queue as one of the 4 features of a storage account. And preferably, you would also create a managed identity. What is that managed identity? It's where it is allowing you to connect from Event Grid into the storage account without using the traditional access key security token, but using an internal Azure service principal. That's what I already deployed in my environment. So let's go back to our Azure DevOps for now. Back into Streams. And I already configured my event grid, the PDT ADO audit. Should be one of these listed here. I wish I could show you an integration with some other examples I have, like for some of my other demos, totally outside of this topic, but I got a pizza event grid. Think of it as like a automation engine for handling pizza orders. A little bit like a Uber Eats or Deliveroo-alike scenario, but would be pretty cool whenever something's happening in Azure DevOps that it would actually fire off a pizza order. Maybe when something goes wrong in Azure DevOps, and you need to troubleshoot after hours, pizza could be more than welcome. So I created my event grid topic for my auditing. The topic is there, the access key is there, and my subscription is also there. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit to show you what's happening. So over the course of my events, like triggering a pipeline, making some changes in security settings or anything like that, it's gonna pick up those events. Where again, for now, out of that base event grid model, event grid is going to recognize the stream, but it's not doing anything useful with it. So what we have out of that subscription model that we deployed earlier, we have that integration with our storage queue, which means Azure DevOps triggering an audit event, sending it along to event grid. And event grid actually is like watching over, that's the subscription model. It's actually going to listen to Azure DevOps for new auditing streams and allowing you to store it in, for example, an Azure storage account or a function or anything else. We're now on the lower level, the storage account interaction. It's again recognizing the data streams. Again, think back about the filtering. If you want to send security events out of Azure DevOps to a specific storage account and overall pipeline runs into a different storage account logging model, that could obviously be the case. And that's also why having 1 or 2 event grid subscriptions in Azure DevOps could actually be okay, because now the intelligence is being moved out to event grid and not on the Azure DevOps auditing stream itself. From here, I can drill down in my storage account queue. So I'm switching to my storage account, and it means if I check my queuing system here, I'm actually going to see a couple of messages. I'm not doing anything with the messages from here, but at least it's allowing me to show you at least one easy use case where obviously from here you would move it out to some other scenario, storing it into a log file, maybe triggering another action like running a function, running that webhook kind of like scenario where the main objective would be the same. triggering an event in Azure DevOps, picking it up in auditing, from there moving it to some external service. And James is going to talk about Azure Monitor Logs integration and later on Splunk integration as well. So pretty cool stuff coming up. That's basically it. Takes you about maybe 5 to 10 minutes, assuming you know Azure storage accounts, you know a little bit about event grid and overall access key handling. But that's all I wanted to show you in this part of the demo. Cool, that worked. James, would you mind covering the next options we have?
Sure, no problem. So that moves us on to Azure Monitor Logs. So it's a part of a broader service under Azure Monitor. As it explains, it stores metrics like short-term, near real-time telemetry information on things like Azure VMs, app services, storage, and it can be also used for hybrid resources like virtual machines. When we talk about Azure Monitor, we talk about a longer retention information when we're using it, but allows us to run powerful queries when we're looking into the data. We can retrieve anything from your environment information, like a list of active VMs. So it's saying simple to saying more complex, like the app service, where is it running? So central US, for example. Does it have, it must be running anything that's running 3.1.net, then it's a P1 app running a P1 app service plan, and also has logged an event ID of 404 in the last 2 hours. So we can run something like that, and it will then produce an output on that complex query. Since we are using Azure DevOps and Azure DevOps integrates well with Azure, it would make sense for us to be able to store this auditing information in Azure Monitor Logs as well.
I'm pretty sure you got a demo on that.
Yeah, and I do definitely have a demo on that. Yeah, so I'll move on to that. To add an Azure Monitor log stream, we first need to select New Stream. Once we select New Stream, we're going to select the Azure Monitor Logs. And here we are required to provide the Logs Workspace ID and the Logs Shared Key. We can find this in the Log Analytics Workspace. So this is my Log Analytics Workspace. And if I select it and go into agent configuration, agent configuration, my workspace ID will be here. So I will copy this, and my secondary key my primary key will be here. I can either use the primary key or the secondary key. And I will copy the ID into here, and either the primary or secondary key into here, and I will click setup. I've done one from earlier, and that is now activated. Once it is activated, allow approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and once that is done, you should be able to go into your logs, and in here you should be able to search Azure DevOps Auditing. And if we just delete that, so we're just searching for Azure DevOps Auditing, anything in regards to that category in the last 24 hours. If we run it, you can see there's a load of events. If you just created the link like we just done, the first event you'll see is this one here. And if we scroll down, what you'll see here is details of this log is stream for Azure Monitor Logs was set up to send auditing events to, and then the workspace ID. So that would be usually in the audit logs in Azure DevOps. So this means it's working. After a little while, you'll start seeing even more events. One we did trigger earlier on purpose. Let's see if it's here. Let's just so that's an access log. If you go back to it and we show you, so audit log access log, and it tells me who accessed it. So actor display name James Cook. So that's when I access the audit log. So the one I'm looking for maybe a little bit further back. Here we go. Library agent pool deleted. So this is an example. So I created an agent pool and deleted it. And here it tells me what agent pool was deleted, the ID, the name of it, the procedure that it ran, which was delete agent pool, and the ID of the action. So it tells you who the category remove, who did it, James Cook, and the type, which is Azure DevOps Auditing. So very powerful tool. The logs start collecting into this one location. What we can do is use the logs from here and use it in other Azure services, so such as Azure Monitor. What I'll show you is an example of it being used in Sentinel. So this Azure Sentinel is linked to my central login Azure Analytics workspace, and what you can see there is already collecting logs. And if we click it here, it just takes me back to the login platform and start bringing up the logs for that. So if we just go back, what we can do with that information now being logged, we can set up alerts. So there's a rule template that Microsoft provides, and if we search DevOps, you can see all these Azure DevOps templates that we can set up. So for example, pull created and then deleted. So I've just selected this, and it comes up on this side, the description. So as well as adding build agents to an existing pool to execute malicious activity within a pipeline, an attacker could create a complete new agent pool and use this for execution. So this rule basically detects a creation and deletion in a time window. So here is the query. So we can create the rule and schedule it to run. So if we create a rule, so we can set it so that we can keep the defaults, so the name, the description, the tactics, defensive evasion, initial access, execution, discovery, so on and so forth. We can set the severity, what status it is, enable, disable. We can set a rule logic with any of these information we can change. Again, this is a template, so we can leave it as default. Incident setting, which is a preview, in preview at the moment, so we can create an incident. Yeah, we can set an alerting group, so you can enable an alerting group and set that information as well. So we're going to leave that disabled. Automated response, again we can search for a playbook here and set a playbook here to run as part of that, and we can then create the rule. What we're going to do is for now is run the query manually. So I'm just going to copy this, just make sure it's all highlighted. Yeah. And what we're going to do is, if we go into logs, we're just going to check that that query works. So what I did earlier was created a new agent pool and deleted it within a few minutes. So if we run that query manually, that's the result. So based on that query, which is that template, rule template, if that rule checked in and noticed the incident that this query is running, it would trigger an alert, and it would alert me that this event, where the agent pool name called new demo pool, has basically triggered the creation of an agent pool and deletion in a specified period based on this query. So we can set alerts on there. We can have it run an event grid trigger that Peter has described, so we can have that run something. So that's Azure DevOps, log analytics, Azure monitor logs using log analytics and Sentinel.
That's pretty cool stuff, James. Yeah, like you might remember from the first introduction, so we're now at option number 3, where we're going to take a step away from the Azure platform. Why? Because Azure DevOps, although it has Azure in the name, is not limiting you to interact with the Azure backend. So you can obviously deploy resources into Azure, but you could also deploy them in a completely different environment outside of Azure. And that's where the preview for now opens up the door to Splunk. Now, if you don't really know what Splunk is, honestly, I haven't used it that much myself, but that's why I brought James into this session. And Splunk is describing themselves as a data to everything solution platform. Where again, James, I'm going to rely on you from here on to just introduce me to Splunk, what it is, why it makes it amazing, and eventually how auditing stream from DevOps is integrating with it.
Yeah, Splunk is a really big beast to control. Yeah, you can do so much with it. There's so much capability with it. It's not just anything in regards to just your DevOps. It is. You can do so much with it. So, but in short, it provides about anything you need to in regards to security state, overall platform observability, detailed IT operations views, and incident management. Besides the tools as such, they also provide specific solutions for business and technical verticals. So when we look at it, like IT operations, it's used by sysadmins. When we talk about SIEM, it's used mostly for security, incident and mitigation. So you're looking at like InfoSec teams using that, and also providing an integration with DevOps, which is why we're talking about it on this video. And that's why we are going to move on to talking about the Splunk integration with the stream. So I'll move now on to a demo of how to integrate Splunk with Azure DevOps and how to run some queries within Splunk and how to trigger some alerts. To add a stream to Splunk for auditing, we first need to create a HTTP event collector in Splunk. First, we'll click Settings and Data Inputs. Here, we just click Add New next to the HTTP event collector. Once loaded, we'll give it a name. So we're just going to call this DevOps Demo. So we'll leave these two fields as empty. We can populate them with a description, which may be good practice to do. Again, the enable indexer acknowledgement is optional. You can leave this unchecked. And what we're going to do is click Next. And again, in here, we can put some input settings. By default, you can leave this empty and let it automatically detect. So we're just going to click Review and click Submit. Once that's done, we can take the token value, copy that, and go back to our auditing, select new stream, select Splunk, paste the token, and for Splunk URL,
there's a document approach to setting up Splunk, and he recommends using the URL and entering input hyphen at the beginning of your Splunk. What we found with this demo is that does not work at the moment. So what we ended up doing is, if we go to our actual Splunk demo we got set up at the moment, we did not use the input. And when you are in Splunk, for example, we do not see a port number, and what we found from documentation is the default port number is 8088 when you're using Splunk Cloud. If you are the administrator and you know you use a different port number, specify that instead, but by default it should be 8088. So once we've done that, we click save and the connection will be successful with Splunk. Again, allow 10 to 15 minutes for some logs to start populating into Splunk. And if you go back into your Splunk search and reporting dashboard, we're going to search for anything with the word Azure in it. And what you can see here is some logs from today. And you can see here, this is the stream for Azure Monitor logs was set up to send auditing events to, and then the ID number. So we can see that this is coming from the organization. That's my organization name. That is organization level this log is coming from. We can see that it was a create job, category create. So what I've done earlier was I have set up alerting. Something similar to what we've done with Azure Monitor logs in Sentinel. I've created a DevOps new agent pool created alert. Here it's enabled and it will trigger actions where it will add within Splunk into the triggered alerts activity log, and also send an email when someone creates a agent pool. So what we can do is open in search. And this will just run the query, which is action ID equals library.agent pool created. And you can see here that someone created an agent pool, and the details were created agent pool, new demo pool. And it provides you the same information that we saw in the log, Azure Log Monitor, and in the Sentinel. You can see it gives you the scope ID, the organization, the status category, which is create, the actor display name James Cook. So the same information from the Azure Monitor logs are also in Splunk. So when this triggers, it will show up in triggered alerts, which you can see here. So you can see that in August this triggered on the 29th of August and the 31st of August. It set the priority to severity to high. And what we can do is, if we quickly go back to alerts, we can just quickly check when it runs. So it runs every 45 minutes past the hour, expires after 30 days, the alert, and the condition is when it happens once. So if it 45 when it hits that 45 minutes past the hour again, if that event is still there, it will not trigger an alert again. It just creates it on when there's a new event, and it'll, like you see, it'll add the trigger severity high, which we saw high. It also sends an email, which will send to my email address with the subject heading and message. And you can do so much more with Splunk. You can install the Splunk app and also get alerts be pushed through there. As you can see, if we go to add actions, we can log an event, output results to lookup, output results to telemetry endpoint, run a script, send to Splunk mobile, and send a webhook. And for a webhook, we can send it to Teams. We can do this with Sentinel as well as part of a playbook. But yeah, we can send it via webhook to something like Teams and alert and create an alert in Teams. And that's how Splunk works with auditing.
I think, James, this was a really, really cool session. I learned a lot about Splunk, first of all, because again, it's a little bit outside of my traditional playground, I would say. And next to that, I hope for you in the audience, first of all, you enjoyed the session. You learned something new about one of the cooler features, I would say, in Azure DevOps, auditing. We talked about the difference between logging and audit streaming, where I hope we convinced you that moving into auditing streaming is probably slightly better than just storing it offline in some logging capability. We talked a little bit about permissions and biggest part of the session, integrating some demos, how to use the different auditing stream backends, Azure Event Grid, Azure Monitor Logs, and Splunk to allow you to capture everything that's going on in your DevOps environment. And with that, I would say, if you want to stay in touch, more than happy to share our contact details once more. For me, it's PDTIT on Twitter. That would be my prime channel. Or if you want to send me an email because maybe you're not on Twitter, that would be petender@microsoft.com. Everybody knows your contact details, James, but maybe there's still someone in the audience who has no idea how to reach out to you. So what's the best way to reach out to James?
I am very active on Twitter. So if you are on Twitter, my handle is @officialcookj. And if you're not on Twitter, visit my website, jamescook.dev, where my other social media platforms and contact details are there.
Way cool. Last, I'm going to thank you, James, for helping me with this wonderful co-presenting. I really enjoyed it, and I think you also did a pretty good job. Everyone in the audience, whenever you're watching this as a recorded session, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned from it. And thanks to Dwayne once more for organizing Azure Back to School this September month.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for supporting me in presenting this and preparing for it. And to the audience, I'm looking forward to seeing you again in other future sessions. Have a great day.
Same to you. Thank you.